Hey guys, finally time for a new lecture. It's been a while since I made something against the French, and I believe it's the right moment to teach you how to play against the Winawer defense. I had like so many options. Certainly, I didn't want to opt for the main line, and there are like a whole bunch of four pretty weird moves for white. In some lines, even suspicious one for white, but I actually opted for a little bit less known Alekhine-Maroczy Gambit. It's one of the best, I would say, offbeat variations against the Winawer French, and it appears after e4, e6, d4, d5, knight c3, and bishop b4. Just like you know, this is Winawer defense. When they play bishop b4, they always, first of all, annoys us with this knight on c3 being there. They just want to take on c3, breaking the pawn structure, but at the same time, they also want to take on e4 and get a pawn for nothing. So what's the point there? The thing is, we just have to go, actually e5 is the main line, but I opted here for the knight g2 line. There is like a big chance that apart from this line, I'm going to give you one more against the Winawer defense, but I'm pretty sure that you're going to like this video really a lot. I remember even when I made a series of videos against the French on the Chessable channel, the only one that lacked was against the Winawer defense. So let's get started. Get ready for really interesting lines with lots of tactics and, just as you're used to, aggression from white's point of view. And by the way, one last thing before I start to officially explain you like the secrets of this line, I'm going to start to play like way more d4 first move videos for white, I believe from the next week. Let's get started. After knight g2, there are like 6 moves for black. I'm gonna start with the worst one. Believe it or not, the worst one is one of the most logical ones, and the one that all typical French players like to do in these type of games. It's c5. They just, looks like they break the center. But before that, I just want to tell you one thing about this Alekhine-Maroczy approach. Take a look at these knights. It's called Alekhine-Maroczy Gambit because we don't care about the pawn on e4. Let it be. We just sack it, and afterwards we just want to carry on with more or less normal game. One of the points of the knight g2 is to always have a very flexible approach and to be able to recapture by knight on c3 in case the bishop takes on c3. So this is the thing. As you know, one of the main lines of the Winawer, not one of the main lines, actually like 80% of the game is with e5, c5, a3, and you really need a lot of knowledge, theoretical knowledge, understanding, different kinds of plans and everything else in order to cope well and to get along well with these positions. It's not easy. I have to tell you that from my practical point of view and as a pretty experienced coach. And that's why I believe that knight g2 is going to solve your problems. After knight g2, when they go with c5, you just play a3. You immediately show your intentions. So in case they go with bishop a5, as usual, you take on c5, you want to connect your pawns with b4, and unlike other French positions where d takes c5 usually is not that difficult for black because they have bishop c3 and you have to take by pawn. Here, that's not a case. We're not going to take by pawn. We won't make like triple pawns on the c file. We're just going to keep the flexible approach. So if they take, we're going to take by knight. And not just that, we're up a pawn. And on the top of all that, we have the bishop pair. That's what I like about this Alekhine-Maroczy Gambit. You always usually end up with the bishop pair advantage. In case they go with bishop c3, you take it. All of a sudden, you threaten both. to take on d5 and to take on c5. In case they take on e4, you take on c5, you're already completely winning. Take a look at this position at home, but e4 is kind of weak. You got a bishop pair advantage, and it's a very easy game. In case they take on d4, you take by queen. You, at the moment, threaten pawn on d5. Any knight c6, you just pin it with a bishop b5. That's the power of these bishops. You can use them now. And in case they go knight f6, now you use the power of another bishop, bishop g5. You threaten e5. Also, they have lots of problems to release the pressure from the f6 knight, because you always have this bishop b5, which is not only going to solve the problem of the pin, but also we're going to keep on threatening on d5 after he takes d5, and e5 against the knight on f6. So these are actually the reasons why we have to consider c5 being absolutely the worst. There is also a possibility that they go with b6. A typical French approach, where they just try to solve the problem of the weak light square bishop with some bishop a6, doesn't seem to be working here. You play a3, which is initially your main idea here. So in case they capture, you just capture by knight, and you once again are left with the bishop pair advantage. I constantly keep bringing up this story about the bishop pair, and you know what does it mean. Play aggressive, keep the game open, and absolutely always give as much air and space to your bishops as possible. So one guy played against me bishop a6. I believe it was an FM from Malaysia. I captured on a6 and played this sneaky queen e2 move. I'm threatening to take the knight, but at the same time, I'm threatening to take on d5 and to go after the king on e8. I was winning. In case they go with knight e7, to be able to go with the bishop a6, we've got a specialty here. It's the move queen f3. And that move queen f3 usually turns out to be a very important in these positions, because once again, you're left with the bishop pair advantage, but at the same time, you'd like to complete your development by developing the dark square bishop either on a3, f4, or g5, and afterwards making a long castle. A very nice and easy plan. Apart from b6, there is a third move, pretty suspicious one. It's knight e7. Those who play knight e7, you just carry on with your traditional plan. You play a3. Line with bishop c3, knight c3. Once again, first of all, we keep the flexible pawn structure. Once again, we've just fulfilled the main role of the knight on e2. So we just captured by knight. And once again, we're left with a bishop pair, which is a pretty huge advantage, since the game is still open, since we haven't committed ourselves with any e5 to close the center. So when they play castles, you play queen f3. You like to develop your dark square bishop to a3, f4, g5. I played like a couple of games like this. Then you capture by queen. You'd like to go with bishop d3, queen h4, and to go with mates. When they play knight bc6, bishop g5. What's so special about it? You pin this knight, provoke them to weaken themselves. You want to go with the long castles. By the way, they can't touch on d4 because you would just exchange, take on e7, and when they take like this, I believe just king d2 would be enough to be completely winning. And not just that, you can now, when they take, play bishop c4, go with, I don't know, king e3, and win even this knight. So just like I said, remember that any move like c5, b6, or knight e7, you just go with a pretty typical a3, which is the main idea of this gambit. Then when they take, you just capture by knight and play this and bring this queen out into the game with the queen on f3. Open up the dark square bishop for your for the further actions, like with the bishop a3 or bishop g5, and eventually you want to make the long castle completing your development. I also like to push this pawn like crazy. I used to say on the king side, weakening the dark squares and the king side incomplete. There is also one more line. If they don't play that, but they play bishop a5, trying to at least keep the bishop here, then you go with g3, because you gotta find a way to solve the problem and to develop the light square bishop. Probably the best way to do so is by g3 and bishop g2. Why? Because you want to keep this this flexibility, and you just want to always be able to capture on c3 by knight. After d takes b4, knight takes c4, bishop b2 to defend the pawn, c3, and I like bishop g2. With a full center, with a pretty bad light square bishop, even worse dark square bishop, good control of the center and connected pieces, also lots of flexibility in our game, I believe that white is already much better. And time for some more serious approaches and lines. We are left to check like 3 more moves. First one is knight c6. This one is a little bit more serious one, because when you play a3, and you always go a3, that actually makes this line even easier for you for learning, because you always play a3. If they capture and take on e4, because now d4 pawn is hanging, we just enter into one of the main lines. I'm going to discuss about this line in the end, when we actually consider the d takes c4 fourth move. After knight c6 a3, if they play bishop a5, you just go b4, you just go bishop b2, and you just go with, for example, knight g7, queen d2, knight a4. What's so special about this knight a4? You'd like to take on b6, which is once again going to win the bishop here. You also want to play c4, and in case they ever capture, you just bring like a strong development advantage and the strong pawn chain stretched from a3 to d4. You have a nice bishops. You always can choose the moment to take on b6, but at the moment you actually threaten to win the bishop by b6, by c5, which means they have to play e6, in which case you take on b6 and absolutely break their pawn structure. Finally, when they play bishop d7, you just go with c4, which is an important move, take on b6, and play queen c3. You threaten d5 to mate them on g7 or to win the knight on c6. You'd also like, after you created this battery with the bishop b2 and queen c3, to push your pawn, h2 pawn, from h2 up to h6, which would be serious weakening on the dark squares and of the king side. Another nice line. And finally, and the most important moment happens now. What happens when black plays d takes e4 and knight f6? Let's first take a look at the fourth move, knight f6. When they play knight f6, that's what I play when I play French, because once in a while I like to play French. So knight f6, e5, knight after d7. Get ready for some really special games and lines here. Knight e7 is the best line. And what happens after knight a4? You go into a better version. Of those positions when they play like this. First of all, I've seen a game where the guy took on c3 by knight and then wanted to bring the bishop back to e7. Do you know how they react in these positions? Always queen g4. This queen g4 weakens the king's side and provokes weaknesses. By the way, never forget, any castles should be met by bishop h6, and in order to defend mate, they would have to play g6, which wins an exchange. Any g6 gives you a bishop h6, which is which pretty much destroys the king's side, and an easy development by black afterwards. So when they play c5, breaking in the center, you take it. Why? Because you want to open up the game. Why? Because the king remains weak in the center, which means open the game up, especially along the d file. So after knight c6 long castles, I'll show you a game of mine. Knight a5, I gave check. The guy played bishop d7. I put my queen back to g3, threatened the knight. When he played f6, I played rook h to e1. I don't even want to discuss this position further. We're threatening rook takes c5. They have this terrible king on e8. They don't even have possibility to make castle. In case they take on b5, we would capture by knight, and still remains in the air that knight e6 threat. What is just so much better? Not so much better. What is completely winning? I won this game in few moves with lots of sacrifices, but I don't want to now like show off in this position because it's pretty easy for playing. And finally, if they play king f8, lots of guys like to play king f8. They don't wanna, they can't play castle because of bishop h6. They can't play g6 because of bishop h6 and inability to make castle, but they like to do this king f8. Although king on f8 remains weak. And then you go with the specialty h4. First of all, you'd like to push your pawn up to h6, which is going to break them on the dark squares. Secondly, you'd like to activate the rook in these positions by rook h3 and rook f3. In this game, played between an FM and another guy, this black played h5, white played queen to g3, and played c5. The general approach in all these Winawer systems is once they play c5, you gotta capture. I just have to remind you that most of my students who I start to coach, when I ask them, do you have like a special request? What would you like to start with? They usually say, give me French. And yes, they do want to start with the French because French is the only opening that is unlikely to be like other e4 openings. The center is closed, the game is kind of blocked, and you just need to learn these things. Here, we're always taking on c5 because it opens up the game, especially considering the fact that the king stands on f8 and that remains weak for the rest of the game. After like bishop c5, bishop g5, queen b6, long castles. They can't take on f2 because of queen f4, and then you play rook h3, rook f3, or rook d3, rook f3, whatever. But I especially like, and I like much more rook h3. This guy played bishop d7, bishop d3, knight a6, and played queen f4. He was really getting ready for mate. This guy played rook c8. But I have to say that most of these moves by black were more or less normal. Played bishop e8, securing the defense of the f7, and put the king on g8. Now a nice idea of deflection with the bishop b5. And this guy probably completely forgot about the following trick. You can take your time, pause the video, and try to find tactics where white wins. A very nice tactical shot by white. Rook f6, and this rook goes towards h6, which is unstoppable mate. It's the game between Fritz Simmons and Fair, played back to 2014. In case they go knight e4, a3, knight c3, and they take on c3, I'll show you two games of Andrei Sokolov, who had an amazing experience against two GMs. So look at this. They go castles. He plays bishop d3. The most logical thing, probably wants to go with the queen h5 to provoke them either to go with g6, in which case queen brings back, and then he goes h4, h5, and the dark squares would be just weak. Or, just like this guy played f5, he captured. Why? Why do you have to capture? Because you have a bishop here. Please don't keep the game blocked. Don't keep the game closed if you have these bishops. That would be terrible. But you just play e takes f6, and that's a very healthy approach to this line. So queen f6 threatens mate in 1. Of course, he goes with castles and completes his development. And now Sokolov played like two games, once against knight c6 and once against c5. Against knight c6, this guy probably, not probably, he actually wanted to go with e5 with more or less normal game. That was Grandmaster Lucky. So Sokolov played queen h5, h6, and played bishop to d2. What for? To play rook a to e1. Why? Because he just needs to do this rook e1 to block e5 and maybe to include this rook with the rook lifting into some sort of action. This guy played e5. He played rook a to e1. And he was ready to face any e4 with queen d5 check, and his center would fall like a house of cards. he had to take on d4, and that's a nice general like approach to these positions. You're happy if they take on d4, break the center, and open your bishops. Look how white in just 5 moves won this game. Came up with check, took on d4, and now if queen d4, he would just play queen e8, threatening both bishop h6 and rook e8. That's why he captured by knight. He played rook to e5, disconnecting these two, the connection between the queen and the knight. At the moment, white threatens queen takes d4, has to play knight c6, brings the queen back to e4, threatening mate in 1. They gotta go g6. Boom. Da-da-da-da. Bishop c3, black resigned. What for? Because the queen and the king looks terribly bad, and now these bishops look amazing here. So you threaten rook c5 or rook e8 with that winning position, and black resigned. Another guy played c5. This could be a good example, like positional example for you guys. What are you supposed to play? Pause the video and ask yourself, well, those who said take on c5, you guys were absolutely right. But only if you said, I don't want to take on c5 because I want to be up a pawn. But if you said, I want to take on c5, no matter how weak pawns I have, but basically I have the bishop pair. I intentionally put a yellow color on all these pawns just to point out how weak is these pawns. On the other hand, take a look at the bishop pair. It's fantastic. So after like knight c6, rook b1, e5, queen h5, once again, we're analyzing game of Sokolov. E4 cannot work anymore because of queen d5, play g6, queen g5. Probably the best practical chance to do something in this game and to save this already terribly bad position for black was to go into the endgame with queen g5. But I guess most of us wouldn't do that. And that actually brought us into the following position, where white in the next 5 moves made an amazing combination and won this game in a great attacking style. Played f4. Absolutely illegal. Why? Because he's up a bishop pair, he's up a pawn, and he just wants to go wild. This guy played e4. Now he can do that because d5 is defended, so queen g5 doesn't seem to be working. But now he probably wants to break with c4. This guy played d4, and now white plays bishop b2. All of a sudden, both of these white bishops became strong. The guy captured, and look at this monster on c3. Who's gonna stop the activity of this bishop? The guy played bishop e6. For all of you who'd like to work on practicing initiative and how to come up with it during the game, pause the video and find the next move. It's f5. Congratulations to all of you who found it. But e5 is such a nice move. They can't do anyhow but by bishop. And when that happened, boom, rook takes b7, 2 exclamation mark moves, a terrific tactical combination because it deflected this queen from defending and controlling this diagonal for the bishop. Queen is no longer no longer there. So after bishop c4, queen h6, and he couldn't stop checkmate. What a beautiful end of the game, you have to admit. So Sokolov, Andrei Sokolov, who played like 2 games in this opening, both in 2000, like 20 years ago, he made absolutely and exceptionally good examples that are still model examples for this line. And now I want to show you 2 main lines. After knight f6, e5, we've seen what happens after knight e4. But even when I play this position with black, I play knight f to d7. And here I played 2 nights ago against one of the best Serbian players, Ivan Išević, used to be 2650 for the last 15 years. And the guy came up with the a3 and knight f4. We're going to discuss this position. In case they capture on c3, once again, this is the point of the system. Healthy capturing on c3 by knight and getting like a full and a very open activity of both of these bishops. After c5, as you know, we always play queen g4, provoking what? Castles, bishop h6, either mate on g7 or winning an exchange. g6, just play bishop h6 and you have a fantastic game. Or you can even play knight b5, going with the knight d6, which is gonna give like a very nasty check and fully take advantage of the dark squares and weak king. And finally, in case of king f8, take on c5. And now you're happy if they take on e5, because you just bring your queen back and the game is open for both of your bishops. They captured on c5, bishop e3 threatens the knight, b6, long castles, and when they play knight c6, you always play queen h5. This queen h5 move is a nice one because it defends pawn on e5, and at the same time it prevents h5 by black. After this, f4, g6, queen f3, h4 to play g4 to play h5. My opponent played h5. I played g4, capturing like this, and played knight to e7. Played h5, knight f5, and just bishop f2. All that white wants to do here is to kick this knight away with b4, play bishop d3, kick this knight away, and play bishop h4, bishop f6. That's absolutely winning position for white. But let me now show you one of the main lines of the system when you play a3, and of course, all these good players will bring their bishop back to e7. Here, I'm talking about the game played against Ivanišević 2 nights ago. He came up with this early knight f4, which I'm going to present in this lecture. I very much like it. I gotta be honest that I won in a very nice style from black's point of view, but he didn't play the most accurate with white pieces. But since he's a very creative player, he gave me an idea what am I supposed to show you here. So let me just show. So this is like a brand new analysis. Knight f4. The idea of knight f4, you just sometimes attacks the center on d5, sometimes pawn on e6, but basically you're just giving yourself to place your queen on g4. After knight f4, they have castles, g6, and c5. In my opinion, the only move is c5. But what happens if they play the most logical move, castle? Then bishop to d3. You include one more piece into the action, and usually having these four pieces that direct the king side, that usually gives white almost decisive advantage. After bishop d3, in case g6 happens, I once again believe that reaction in the center by c5 should be the best. In case g6 happens, queen g4. My opponent 2 nights ago went with h4, and that gave me a precious time to do c5. And when he played c5, when he played h5, I did have time to do this. And when he sacrificed on h7, came up with this check, I put the king here, and he took on e6. He was hoping that I would take so he could mate me, but then I came up with the counter tactics with knight e5, and after d takes e5, bishop e6, I was completely winning. I was up a piece with black pieces, and just like you see, being very inaccurate out of the opening can bring you like lots of problems. That's why on g6, I'm coming up with an improvement. Queen comes to g4. And let me show you. Let's say your opponent plays the most logical move, and that's c5, like breaking the center, threatening c takes d4, a5 eventually, but then boom, bishop takes g6. Can you imagine? You sack the first piece, boom, you sack the second piece. They gotta take, you take, and here a specialty is queen h5, because you give check to this king. When the king goes on g8, learn about this trick. You play bishop h6. At the moment, you're not threatening to take the rook on f8 because you're down 2 pieces. You threaten queen g6, or you want to go with rook d1, rook d3, rook g3, rook lifting, or long castle, rook d3, rook g3. No matter what happens, white is completely winning. Another thing, when you play knight f4 and they go castles, you do bishop d3, and they go c5 straight away, you once again have queen h5 with pretty much the same idea. Knight g6, Another nice sacrifice, another one that you have to do. Bishop g6, they can play rook f7. Once again, the same idea. And after this double piece sacrifice, you once again go with this queen h5, and once again go with this crucial bishop h6, followed by rook lifting ideas or queen g6 mate. This is a nice trick. I'm pretty sure that thanks to this trick, you're going to win like zillions of your games in the future. Lots of guys against me went with g6. And look, what are you going to do? You play h4, trying to break with h5. I'm pretty sure that no one of you can guess the following trick. And every one of you, even the top guys who watch this video, they're going to say, well, I'm just going to play c5 and on any h5 to play g5. That's the trick. Guys, that's the trick, and get ready for something really beautiful. You go with h5. I guarantee that 2,600 guys are about to fall. 2,700 guys are about to fall in for the following trap. g5. Boom. Knight g6. Can you believe it? And now I'm about to show you like a big number of really spectacular lines. In case they take on d4, you just take on h8. D takes c3, you play queen d3, and you're up an exchange. You have both of these threats, knight f7, queen h7, and they can defend. In case they take on f pawn, you take h takes g6, and you now threaten g7 followed by queen h5 mate, which is extremely hard to defend, and what is all of a sudden completely winning. In case they don't touch anything but bring this rook to g8, you take on e7, and after knight b5, you either go with knight c7 check, which is going to win the rook, or knight d6, where you would just stick your knight into the heart of their game and beat them so easy. Most of these guys just say, what the hell is this? And they just take on g6. A guy who played against me like 2 nights ago said an impressive thing here. I captured by h pawn. Can you believe it? I sacrificed knight. Now I'm sacrificing rook, and I came up with this beautiful g7 pawn. This is an importance of the pawns in chess, and this is how I managed to win this game. I actually couldn't wait to show you this one because it's a really nice one, and the game happened on chess.com, so hope you just enjoyed it. And finally, when you play knight f4 and they just go with c5, that's the critical line, because you play on the wing, your opponent should break in the center. So you just go with queen g4, or you can go with d takes c5, and when they play knight e5, connect these pawns like this and play bishop b2. That's also like a line with lots of counter-attacking chances for both sides. Instead of d takes c5, you can play queen g4, 8th move, and after castles, to go with knight to d3. When they take, you play bishop h6. You gotta take on d4 and bring your queen on f4. They can hardly stop long castle followed by h4 and h5. Well, it has a very nice initiative. In case of queen g4 and some pawn moves, you play bishop d3, and are you ready, guys? Don't even hesitate. Knight e6. Now, a counter sack, what I did in my game against that guy that I previously mentioned, knight e5, queen d4 saves the day, and after queen e5, castles, what is just so much better, and this happened in Canada like 15 years ago between some FIDE master and grandmaster Arencibia Rodriguez. White, certainly thanks to the weakened dark squares, pretty nice bishops, and IQP had a nice and easier game and managed to win. So guys, finally it's time to show you the main line, and thanks to the following, d takes e4, this is how the system was named after, so it's called Alekhine-Maroczy Gambit. I guess both of these guys played this variation with the white pieces. So after d takes e4, a3. That's why I like this line so much, because no matter what I do, you always play a3. And when you play like a3, they can take, or they can play bishop e7. Taking on c3 is what I did like probably 30 years ago when I just started to play chess, and I lost to GM at the time. I lost to GM in some positions that I'm going to point out in the next couple of minutes. So after knight c3, you just want to get the pawn back on e4 and to carry on playing a normal game with the bishop pair. That's like your general approach. With the bishop pair, as you know, you just have to carry on with your initiative, constantly keep trying to keep the game open and to somehow launch the initiative. After knight c3, what happens? Knight c6 is the main move, and that's how we discussed this position previously, and I told you it transposes into this one. What happens if they just defend the pawn? You give check. Check is so important because you provoke them to even move to either move the king and make it weak, like f8 or whatever, or play g6, in which case young Abdusattorov played queen h3. Abdusattorov played queen h3. He doesn't care about another pawn, because in that case, he would just go with either bishop e3, which earns tempo and long castle, or bishop f4 followed by knight b5, and so on. But this guy, Grandmaster Bikovsky, or I am, played a6, probably to stop knight b5 once he captures on d4. Abdusattorov played bishop f4, and after queen d4 played bishop e2. Knight c6 played castle. I like the general approach by white in this game. You're up bishop pair, you're down 2 pawns, and you have an amazing amount of initiative. The guy played e5, rook d1, queen c5, bishop e3, and Abdusattorov played the key move, f4. f4 breaks the center, breaks the game, and all of a sudden it gives white like a precious time and initiative afterwards. After bishop e6, Abdusattorov took on e4, sacrificed this knight, actually sacrificed. He can't take because of queen e6, but this was a great thing, and he won this game in the next couple of moves. So f5 is not good, and if they try to defend the pawn on e4 indirectly by playing knight c6, you just pin this knight with the bishop c6. I'll show you general approach. Knight e7, bishop g5. You now pin both of these pieces. You want to take on c6, you want to take on e7. In both cases, you would be left with much better knight than bishop. After f6, which is practically the only move, castles, you play queen to d2. Let me just show you something. I remember when I was younger and when I was a kid, I played a game like this. Grandmaster Johnny Hector, who's one of the main representatives of this line with the white pieces, won all his games here. And what happened in his games? In case they play e5, like let's open up the game and break the center, whatever, you play d5, you win the pawn back, and you win another pawn. And now they can't play rook e8 because of this thing. Thing is, they can't play c6 to play rook e8 because you just bring your bishop back to e2, covering your king. And after rook e8, you play queen f4. Position is much better for you since you want to play long castle or short castle afterwards. Then another game by Hector was bishop c3, knight c3, knight c6. I'm repeating this so you can remember it better. Bishop g5, f6, bishop e3, castles, queen d2. This guy played a6. That's a very common move, but I believe it's positional mistake. You take on c6, you play long castles, and you take on e4. After f3, and rook h to e1. Why do I play f3? I play f3 in order to soften the activity of the bishop on b7. On the other hand, I just keep defending my knight on e4 and maintaining control of that knight even better. And I want to go with bishop f2, going after the potentially weak pawn on e6. Here, what is slightly better, this is how Grandmasters Jovanovic, Zoran, good friend of mine from Croatia, and this Johnny Hector guy, that's how they won their games like 10, 15 years ago. And finally, those who play f5. F5 is a, actually, this is what I meant when I said this is a serious positional mistake, because after you play castles, they're not supposed to play any a6 or knight e5. If they play knight e5, you take it, and if they take by pawn, you take it. This is how I lost the game. I have to tell you that I was pretty much sure that I was up a pawn and that I could even fight for a win in my game. I was completely positionally lost. Bishop g5 with tempo, bishop f4 with tempo threatening on c7, and after this h4. With this amazing control of the dark squares, I lost my game without any problems. Hector played queen a5, rook h3, and afterwards had an options of bringing this rook to g3, c3, and go after all these weaknesses in the black scam. I want to show you one more thing. In case of castles, knight d5, queen d5, you just play c4. You just open up your game for your bishops, and you're happy. General assessment of this game for those who like to play with the bishop pair is always play a3, avoid like taking on c3 with the weakening of the pawn structure and creating double pawns, and play with the bishop pair. Finally, we're about to see one of the most beautiful games in this lecture. It was played between Anthony Miles and another guy from Germany, 2400 IM. This guy played a6. Miles captured on c6 and played bishop g5. This is a very common way of forcing your opponent to move the queen. Johnny Hector, after queen d7, won 4 games with d5 here. We can discuss that, but actually I'm not intending to do so. You're just better. GM won like 4 games, and it's enough to know up to this moment. If queen e8, take a look at the following game and take a look at the approach, which is called, and the strategy topic, control of the dark squares. Lots of my students ask me, what is that? Well, when you play f3 and you just break in the center and open up the games, now he's confronted with e5 and g7 and weaknesses on the dark squares. And you have the dark square bishop and they don't. That's control of the dark squares. So let's take a look at the following game. The guy played knight d8. He probably wanted to defend this e6 better, to open up the place for the bishop, to even bring the knight somewhere. Rook h to g1. The guy played c6. Wants to stop any d5 with further pressure. Anthony Miles played rook g3 to double up his rooks with rook g1. That's exactly what happened, and this guy played b5. This game ended up in 5 moves. By the way, probably a guy from United Kingdom and I believe Great Britain heard of Anthony Miles, but actually everyone should. He was one of the most creative players, and he was like so good. The following game is gonna prove that. He played bishop f6. What for? In case this is the first move of the combination. In case rook takes, rook g7, followed by queen g5, crippling up pieces, threatening mate. Go home, buddy. It's mate. You can defend it like this because then this one and queen g7 mate. This guy played rook a to a7. Looks like black can hold here. Anthony Miles added one more piece. Now rook f6 is not an option anymore. He now threatens to, at some point, take on g7. This guy played queen f8. He really threatens to take this bishop. Miles put the bishop into the heart of his game, but without any obvious threat. This guy played king h8. He's not threatening anything, but at least he moved his king from some g-file actions and threats. But on the other hand, this bishop all together with this knights and the queen really does a great x-rays job. So rook h3, he threatens mate. The guy played queen g8, and I'm pretty sure that he believed that this was going to be enough to defend himself. Miles played knight e2, hoping for smothered mate, knight f4, knight g6. This guy played f4, and guys, are you ready? Rook g7. Once again, rook sack. Full domination on the dark squares. Plus, you can see like a great point of having the bishop on e5. When black captured, played knight f4, and believe it or not, he couldn't stop knight g6 modern mate. Fantastic game. I really like it a lot, and it just shows how powerful he was at that time when he was like in the best shape. Finally, it's time for one of the most critical variations nowadays in this Alekhine-Maroczy Gambit. They take c4, a3, and when they bring the bishop back to e7, you take on e4, and they play knight f6 to swap off like pair of the knights and make their game looking easier. You take on f6 and play the following plan. Plan is bishop e3, queen d2, long castle, followed by knight f4 and knight h5, which is going to harass the bishop on f6. I'm showing you game Primogen Nagy against Anish Giri. Game was played 10 years ago. Giri was badly beaten there. And Nagy, Giri played castles, queen d2, long castles, and played knight f4. I already told you about this plan, so it's always the same approach. You play bishop e3, knight f4, queen d2, long castles, and this is how you play. Eventually, you'd like to win the bishop pair like this. Giri played knight d7, and Nagy came up with this nice d5 move, which opens up the d file. When this guy played a5, played knight h5, going after the bishop on e7. And after bishop e7, on f6, brought the bishop back on e7 and opened up the game with f4. When he played bishop d6, probably Giri missed bishop h6. Such a nice tactical move that almost decides the game. Played bishop e5. And after bishop b5, I believe this is another move that he could have missed. Maybe he even saw that the bishop e5, but after king h8, rook h2 e1, he was threatening bishop d7. Afterwards, with a rook e5, if he couldn't move the bishop back into the defense, and Nagy was already winning. That's why, instead of castle committing themselves immediately, they just go b6, knight f4, bishop b7, but in this case, queen g4. I'd like to finish this lecture with another creative guy. His name is Badur Jabava. You probably heard of that guy. I spoke about him many times. He's one of the most attractive players nowadays in the world, and he really likes unusual systems with lots of tactical approaches. After queen g4, in the game was g6, Jabava against Grandmaster Lopez Martinez from Spain. If they play knight d7, Jabava would just play knight h5, going after this bishop, and after g6, take on f6 and play queen g3. Jeffrey Jean played queen h4 and beat Grandmaster Abola from Norway, but you should bring your queen back to g3, play f3 to soften the activity of this bishop. You have a bishop pair advantage. You want to make the long castle. They have problems on the dark squares, and basically you gotta be a lot better. In Jabava's game, Lopez Martinez played g6. Jabava played bishop b5 check, and this guy played c6. After bishop c4, all of a sudden he starts eyeing e6 pawn, and something's gonna happen about that e6 pawn. Queen d6 to defend like everything, to play knight d7, and to decide whether he wants to go long or short castle. Jabava played long castle and knight d7. I'm pretty sure that the black didn't expect the hurricane that is about to happen. The game ended up in 6 moves. Jabava sacrificed on e6. What a nice piece sack. F takes d6, bishop f4, kicking this queen away. Played rook queen e7 and brought his rook onto the open e file, threatening rook e6. Take a look at the connectivity and activity of the white pieces here. He threatens rook takes e6. After long castles, took on e6 and played queen f8. In order to complete this really nice Alekhine-Maroczy system and hopefully nice lecture, I can not that modestly say that this was a very nice lecture with the white pieces and how to treat the Winawer defense. pause the video and try to find what Jabava did here. He played rook takes c6, and Martinez immediately resigned, because in case of bishop c6, bishop a6, bishop b7, queen comes on f3, threatening here, and in case you capture or not capture, queen c6 would just mate the king on c8. I'm very glad that we ended this lecture in the best possible fashion, not just using the tactics, but also seeing the power of the bishop pair. I believe that one of the main topics, main ideas, and highlight things about this opening is especially the bishop pair and the relatively nice attacking chances that white has in all these lines. Hope that you enjoyed in this lecture, and I'm pretty sure that you're gonna have lots of nice wins with it, and you're gonna keep sending me like all those emails. Maya, thank you so much. I've just won tournament thanks to that opening here and that. Also, come up with some of your games. Do it here in the comment section. So always send like a link or just a PGN of your game, and I would gladly share it with the others. Thank you so much, and see you next time. Bye bye.